Right, we have a little surprise tonight. Bit of a challenge of a read, I would say, because I've decided to read something which is a bit worrisome. A bit worrisome. Don't know how I'm going to get on with it. Point being, I'm sort of saying, I really don't know that I want to read it, and perhaps the reason for that will become clear. When I start to read it. I've already done a scary movie tonight. So this is Professor Jim Bendell's paper from 2018. But it's the 2020 release, second edition. The paper is called Deep Adaptation. A map for navigating climate tragedy. A map for navigating climate tragedy. Now, I've had a little perusal of the paper before I started to think about reading it tonight, and it's quite long, so I am really suggesting that we settle in. Hence the long introduction. What else do I have to say about it? It's a first read for me. I'm not reading it because I'm saying I read it and now I want to read it to you. The first time I'm tackling something of this sort. It's not usually when I read something out, it's because I've already read it and enjoyed it and want to share the joy of reading. But here, I am deliberately reading something that I don't know I want to know the truth about, because it's about how bad climate change is. That makes sense? Some of the time frames are outside of my expected lifespan. Some of the time frames may not be. We don't know really. So let's see what Jem Bendell has to say about a map for navigating climate tragedy. 2 years after its first release, this paper has influenced hundreds of thousands of people to reconsider their lives and their work in the face of dangerous climate change. A new agenda for community and movement for deep adaptation to our predicament has been born. It is comprised of people who believe that a climate-influenced collapse of societies in most parts of the world in the coming decades is either likely, inevitable, or already unfolding. Might even give you a chance to pause at that stage and see whether you want to know this. I'm not convinced that it's going to be a joy to read. They are organising a diversity of activities to help reduce harm, save what we can, and create possibilities for the future, while experiencing meaning and joy in the process. This movement has grown through word of mouth, as I did not actively seek to promote deep adaptation through the mass media, and instead focused on enabling peer-to-peer support. Outside of management studies, there is a wide field of scholarship on the experience and possibility of societal collapse, which I did not know about when we released this paper from the Institute in July 2018. In addition, over the last 2 years, many scientists have concluded that societal collapse is the most likely scenario. However, this paper appears to have an iconic status amongst some people who criticize others for anticipating societal collapse. Therefore, 2 years on from initial publication, I am releasing this update. The update involves a light edit, not seeking to incorporate the range of scholarship that is relevant to societal collapse over the past 2 years. Instead, I focus on making specific clarifications and corrections to the original text. The paper therefore remains focused on its originally intended audience, people in the corporate sustainability field. Therefore, the paper does not address the many important issues of poverty, rights, humanitarian action, public policy, relocalization, monetary policy, anti-patriarchy, racial justice, and decolonization. Those subjects were important to me before this paper and remain so, with various contributions on these topics at this website, jimbendell.com. As I am not a climate scientist or an Earth systems scientist and wish to focus on other activities, if you have a view on any aspect of this paper, then I invite you to engage each other by commenting on a Google document version here. Occasional papers. Occasional papers are released by the Institute of Leadership and Sustainability, IFLAS, at the University of Cumbria in the UK to promote discussion among scholars and practitioners on themes that matter to our staff and students. Typically, an occasional paper is released prior to submission to an academic journal as a method for receiving feedback For instance, the first occasional paper by Professor Jim Bendell and Professor Richard Little was subsequently published in the Journal of Corporate Citizenship. However, this paper was rejected for publication by reviewers of Sustainability Accounting, Management and Policy Journal, SAMPJ, as reviewers made requests for major changes which were considered by the author as either impossible or inappropriate to undertake. Impossible, as the request to build off existing scholarship on this topic would require there to be publications on the implications of ecologically induced societal collapse globally upon which to build. A literature review indicated that there is not such scholarship in management studies. Inappropriate, as a reviewer's request not to dishearten readers by sharing my opinion that we face inevitable near-term societal collapse, reflects a form of censure amongst people working on sustainable business and discussed in the paper. The letter from the author to the editor of the journal, with some feedback from the anonymous reviewers, is appended to this occasional paper. Acknowledgements from the author. To write this paper, I had to block out time to review climate science for the first time since I had been at Cambridge University in 1994, and to analyse implications in a rigorous way. I would probably not have done that without the encouragement of the following people for me to prioritise the issue: Chris Erskine, Donald Hine, Jonathan Gosling, Cam Webb and Katie Carr. I thank Dorian Cave for research assistance and Zori Tomova for helping me to prioritise my truth. I also thank Professor Carol Adams for finding reviewers for this paper, and the two anonymous reviewers who provided some useful feedback despite requiring such major revisions that conflicted with the aim of the paper. I also thank Carol for involving me in the SAMPJ as a guest editor in the past. Some funding for my focus on deep adaptation during my sabbatical was provided by Seedbed. Since this paper came out in 2018 and went viral, being downloaded over 500,000 times in the following year, I have met so many people who I am grateful to for helping us to hold all of this difficult awareness. You know who you are. And I would like to thank all the volunteers who have translated the first version of this paper into many languages. If you edit an open access peer-reviewed academic journal and would like this paper to be submitted, please contact the author. If you wish to see the changes made, for instance, to update a translated version, you can download a Word doc showing tracked changes. Taking it a bit serious, but if you've got 500,000 copies of a paper out, £500,000. The purpose of this conceptual paper is to provide readers with an opportunity to reassess their work and life in the face of what I believe to be an inevitable near-term societal collapse due to climate change. The approach of the paper is to analyse recent studies on climate change and its implications for our ecosystems, economies and societies, as provided by academic journals and publications direct from research institutions. That synthesis leads to my conclusion. There will be a near-term collapse in society with serious ramifications for the lives of readers. The paper does not prove the inevitability of such collapse, which would involve further discussion of social, economic, political, and cultural factors, but it proves that such a topic is of urgent importance. The paper reviews some of the reasons why collapse denial may exist, in particular in the professions of sustainability research and practice, therefore leading to these arguments having been absent from these fields until now. The paper offers a new meta-framing of the implications for research, organisational practice, personal development and public policy, called the Deep Adaptation Agenda. Its key aspects of resilience, relinquishment, restoration and reconciliation are explained. This agenda does not seek to build on existing scholarship on climate adaptation, as it is premised on the view that societal collapse is now likely, inevitable, or already unfolding. The author believes that this is one of the first papers in the sustainability management field to conclude that climate-induced near-term societal collapse should now become a central concern for everyone, and therefore to invite scholars to explore the implications. A list of readings, podcasts, videos and networks to support us in our emotional response to the information contained in this paper is available at www.jimbendell.com and at www.deepadaptation.info. Introduction. Can professionals in sustainability management, policy and research, myself included, continue to work with the assumption or hope that we can slow down climate change or respond to it sufficiently to sustain our civilization? As disturbing information on climate change passes across my screen, this was the question I could no longer ignore, and therefore decided to take a couple of months to analyse the latest climate science. As I began to conclude that we can no longer work with that assumption, or hope, I asked a second question. Have professionals in the sustainability field discussed the possibility that it is too late to avert an environmental catastrophe and that the implications for their work? A quick literature review revealed that my fellow professionals have not been publishing work that explores or starts from that perspective. This leads to a third question. on why sustainability professionals are not exploring this fundamentally important issue to our whole field, as well as our personal lives. To explore that, I drew on psychological analyses, conversations with colleagues, reviews of debates amongst environmentalists in social media, and self-reflection on my own reticence. Concluding that there is a need to promote discussion about the implications of a societal chain collapse triggered by an environmental catastrophe, I asked my fourth question on what are the ways that people are talking about collapse on social media. I identified a variety of conceptualizations, and from that asked myself what could provide a map for people to navigate this extremely difficult issue. For that I drew on a range of reading and experience over my 25 years in the sustainability field to outline an agenda for what I have termed deep adaptation to climate change. The result of these 5 questions is an article that does not contribute to one specific set of literature or practice in the broad field of sustainability management and policy. Rather, it questions the basis for all of the work in this field. It does not seek to add to the existing research, policy and practice on climate adaptation, as I found that to be framed by the view that we can manage the impacts of a changing climate on our physical, economic, social, political and psychological situations. Instead, this article may contribute to future work on sustainable management and policy as much as by subtraction as by addition. And by that I mean the implication is for you to take a time to step back and to consider what if the analysis in these pages is true, to allow yourself to grieve and to overcome enough of the typical fears we all have to find meaning in new ways of being and acting. That may be in the fields of academia or management, or could be in some other field that this realization leads you to. First, I briefly explain the paucity of research in management studies that considers or starts from societal collapse due to environmental catastrophe. And I give acknowledgement to the existing work in this field that many readers may consider relevant. I am new to the topic of societal collapse, and I wish to define it as an uneven ending of our normal modes of sustenance, shelter, security, pleasure, identity, and meaning. Second, I summarize what I consider to be the most important climate science of the last few years and how it is leading more people to conclude that we face disruptive changes in the near term. Third, I explain how that perspective is marginalized within the professional environmental sector, and so invite you to consider the value of leaving mainstream views behind. Fourth, I outline the ways that people on relevant social networks are framing our situation as one of facing collapse, catastrophe, or extinction, and how these views trigger different emotions and ideas. Fifth, I outline a deep adaptation agenda to help guide discussions on what we might do once we recognize climate change is an unfolding tragedy. Finally, I make some suggestions for how this agenda could influence our future research for teaching in the sustainability field. As researchers and reflective practitioners, we have an opportunity and obligation to not just do what is expected by our employers and the norms of our profession, but also to reflect on the relevance of our work within wider society. I am aware that some people consider statements from academics that we now face inevitable near-term societal collapse to be irresponsible due to the potential impact that may have on the motivation or the mental health of people reading such statements. My research and engagement in dialogue on this topic, some of which I will outline in this paper, leads me to conclude the exact opposite. It is a responsible act to communicate this analysis now and invite people to support each other, myself included, in exploring the implications, including the psychological and spiritual implications. Locating this study within academia. When discussing negative outlooks on climate change and its implications for human society, the response is often to seek insight through placing this information in context. That context is often assumed to be found in balancing it with other information. As the information on our climate predicament is so negative, the balance is often found in highlighting more positive information about progress on the sustainability agenda. The process of seeking to balance out is a habit of the informed and reasoning mind. Yet that does not make it a logical means of deliberation if positive information being shared does not relate to the situation being described by the negative information. For instance, discussing progress in the health and safety policies of the White Star Line with the captain of the Titanic as it sank into the icy waters of the North Atlantic would not be a sensible use of time. Yet, given that this balancing is often the way people respond to discussion of the scale and speed of our climate tragedy, let us first recognize the positive news from the broader sustainability agenda. Certainly, there has been some progress on environmental issues in past decades, from reducing pollution to habitat preservation to waste management. Much valiant effort has been made to reduce carbon emissions over the last 20 years, one part of climate action officially termed mitigation. Aaron Morrison et al. 2017. There have been many steps forward on climate and carbon management, from awareness to policies to innovations. See Flannery 2015. Larger and quicker steps must be taken. This is helped by the agreement reached in December 2015 at the COP21 Intergovernmental Climate Change Summit. And now that there is significant Chinese engagement, on the issue. To support the maintenance and scaling of these efforts is essential. In addition, increasing action is occurring on adaptation to climate change, such as flood defences, planning laws, and irrigation systems. See Singh et al. 2016. Whereas we can praise these efforts, their existence does not matter to an analysis of our overall predicament with climate change. Rather than building from existing theories on sustainable business, this paper is focusing on a phenomenon. That phenomenon is not climate change per se, but the state of climate change in 2018, which I will argue from a secondary review of research, now indicates near-term societal collapse. The gap in the literature that this paper may begin to address is the lack of discussion within management studies and practice of the end of the idea that we can either solve or cope with climate change. In the Sustainability Accounting Management and Policy Journal, SAMPJ, to which this paper was originally submitted, there has been no discussion of this topic before, apart from my own co-authored paper, Bendell et al. 2017. 3 papers mention climate adaptation in passing, with just one focusing on it by considering how to improve irrigated agriculture. De Souza Fragoso et al. 2018. Organization and Environment is a leading journal for discussion of the implications of climate for organizations and vice versa, where since the 1980s both philosophical and theoretical positions on environment are discussed, as well as organizational or management implications. However, the journal has not published any research papers exploring theories and implications of societal collapse due to environmental catastrophe. 3 articles mention climate adaptation. 2 of these has adaptation as a context, but explore other issues as their main focus, specifically social learning, see Osato et al. 2018, and network learning, Temby et al. 2016. Only one paper in that journal looks at climate adaptation as its main focus and the implications for organization, while a helpful summary of how difficult the implications are for management, the paper does not explore the implications of a widespread societal collapse. Clement and Rivera 2016. Away from management studies, the field of climate adaptation is wide. See Lenikowski et al. 2015. To illustrate, a search on Google Scholar reveals over 40,000 hits for the term climate adaptation. In answering the questions I set for myself in this paper, I will not be reviewing that existing field and scholarship. One might ask, why not? The answer is that the field of climate adaptation is orientated around ways to maintain our current societies as they face manageable climatic perturbations. See above. The concept of deep adaptation resonates with that agenda, where we accept that we will need to change, but breaks with it by taking its starting point, the inevitability of societal collapse, as I will explain below. In addition, after the release of this paper in 2018, I became aware of the fields of scholarship on catastrophic risk, existential risks, and collapsology. See Servine and Stevens 2020. I recommend readers explore the literature in those fields, as I am continuing to do. This paper does not incorporate insights from those fields. Well, okay, that sets the tone, or the context. People engaged in the sustainability industry do not come from a perspective of imminent societal collapse. And that shouldn't surprise us, because their continued their work depends on it, or depends on not facing up to it, not considering it as a possibility. Our non-linear world. This paper is not the venue for a detailed examination of all the latest climatic science. However, I reviewed the scientific literature from the past few years, and where there was still large uncertainty, then sought the latest data from research institutes. In this section, I summarize the findings to establish the premise that it is time we consider the implications of it being too late to avert global environmental catastrophe in the lifetimes of people alive today. The simplest evidence of global ambient temperature rise is undisputable. 17 of the 18 warmest years of the 136-year record have all occurred since 2021, and global temperatures have increased by 0.9 degrees centigrade since 1880. This is data from NASA and GISS in 2018. The most surprising warming is in the Arctic, where the 2016 land surface temperature was 2.0 degrees centigrade, above the 1981 to 2010 average, breaking the previous records of 2007, 2011, and 2015 by 0.8 degrees centigrade, representing a 3.5 degrees centigrade increase since the record began in 1900. That data from Aaron Morrison et al. 2017. This data is fairly easy to collate and not widely challenged, so swiftly finds its way into academic publications. However, to find a sense of the implications of this warming on environment and society, one needs real-time data on the current situation and the trends that it may infer. Climate change and its associated impacts have, as we will see, been significant in the last few years. Therefore, to appreciate the situation, we need to look directly to the research institutes, researchers, and their websites for the most recent information. That means using but not relying solely upon academic journal articles and the slowly produced reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. This international institution has done useful work, but has a track record of significantly underestimating the pace of change, which has been more accurately predicted over past decades by eminent climate scientists, for example, Spratt and Dunlop, 2018, and Hernando Perez et al., 2019. Some researchers have concluded that climate change is and will happen much faster than the IPCC predicted. Zhu et al., for example, in 2018. For instance, the IPCC previously assigned a probability of 17% for crossing the 1.5 degree global ambient warming mark by 2030, which underestimated a few key factors which, quote, bring forward the estimated date of 1.5 degrees C of warming to around 2030, with the 2-degree boundary reached by 2045. That statement from Zhu et al., 2018. The natural fluctuations in the Pacific raises the odds of blasting through 1.5 degrees by 2025 to at least 10%, they wrote. A closer study of the Interdecadal Pacific Oscillation, IPO, found that if it shifts to a positive warming phase, that would lead to a projective exceedance of the 1.5 centigrade warming target centered around 2026. That data from Henley and King in 2017. This is statistical language for how it could be even sooner than that, but hopefully later. Therefore, in this review, I will draw on a range of sources outside of the IPCC, with a focus on data since 2014. That is because, unfortunately, data collected since then is often consistent with non-linear changes to our environment. Non-linear changes are of central importance to developing and understanding climate change, as they suggest both that impacts will be far more rapid and severe than predictions based on linear projections, and that the changes no longer correlate with the rate of anthropogenic carbon emissions. While non-linear change does not necessarily mean exponential, or that there might be a curb or pause in the natural world, changes like non-linear rise in sea level or non-linear changes in sea ice are the result of such massive processes with amplifying feedbacks that it is reasonable to consider that such non-linear processes will be unstoppable. In other words, such changes would constitute both aspects and indicators of what is called runaway climate change. What do people mean by runaway change? Scientists who study climate tipping points have found that we might already have crossed the threshold for a cascade of interrelated tipping points. That would begin taking the Earth to a far hotter state. The researchers concluded that of the 15 tipping points they identified in 2008, 7 now show signs of being active, meaning that they may have already tipped into self-reinforcing and irreversible change. That is along with 2 new ones that they have added to their list. This data from Lenton and et al., 2019. With 9 tipping points in total already active and interrelating, runaway change is a reasonable term to use in that situation. New models are projecting that on current emission pathways, we are headed for over 6 degrees of warming by the end of the century. Johnson, 2019. Therefore, if people assess that we might be, probably are, or definitely are at the start of runaway climate change, they would be credible and not extreme assessments. The warming of the Arctic reached wider public awareness as it has begun destabilizing winds in the higher atmosphere, specifically the jet stream and the northern polar vortex, leading to extreme movements of warmer air into the Arctic and cold air to the south. At one point in early 2018, temperature recordings for the Arctic were 20 degrees Celsius above average for that date, says Watts in 2018. The warming Arctic has led to dramatic loss in sea ice, the average September extent of which has been decreasing at a rate of 13.2% per decade since 1980, so that over 2/3 of the ice cover has gone. This is data from NSIDC and NASA 2018. This data is made more concerning by changes in sea ice volume, which is an indicator of resilience of the ice sheet to future warming and storms. It was at its lowest it has ever been in 2017 and continues a consistent downward trend. Khan, 2017. Given a reduction in the reflection of the sun's rays from the surface of white ice, an ice-free Arctic is predicted to increase global warming by a substantial degree. Writing in 2014, scientists calculated this change is already equivalent to 25% of the direct forcing of temperature increase from CO2 during the last 30 years. That's from Pistone et al., 2014. That means that we could remove a quarter of the cumulative CO2 emissions of the last 3 decades, and it would already be outweighed by the loss of the reflective power of annual Arctic sea ice cover. One of the most eminent climate scientists in the world, Peter Wadhams, believes an ice-free Arctic will occur for a summer in the next few years. Once that happens, the warming feedbacks will make it near certain that after some years an entire year will be ice-free in the Arctic, which he calculated will likely increase by 50%. The warming